Hello and welcome back to Relentless Learning. So today we're going to be looking at an article that my friend sent me, and I'm not going to lie, I was a little on the fence. I was a little defensive about it because it's really finger pointing, and I'm not a fan of language that's like, this is the problem, you're the problem, blah, blah, blah. But I will say, after I read the Ontario Human Rights Committee report 2 times, and I finally understood a little bit better what was trying to be put across. I found the article, once you put those strong words aside, it's more or less saying the same thing. So we're going to be looking at that today. Now, the key point with this one I want to point out is how language can influence potentially how you perceive things, right? So when you take something point blank, you might actually think like, oh, wow, this is a problem. And in this case, because it's about teachers, like teachers are the problem. So I think it is really important to see how certain words influence our perception. And the second thing, as I already mentioned, there is a lot of connection with the report that the Human Rights Committee came out with. So let's get to it. Okay, so to start us off, look at this title. I am not a fan of clickbaitiness, but I mean, granted, we do it in YouTube videos too anyways, but that already kind of set me off. Now, FYI, the premise is that you've already read the article or you've kind of skimmed through, but I'll try my best to slow down a little bit. Again, like I said, the article is super, super long. It took me a couple times to go through. So here, it starts talking about how standardized test results are very poor. And again, this is for the States. This is not for Canada. So immediately, I have some questions. First, were, for example, English language learners included in these results? Because that's obviously going to skew the results in terms of when we look here. 56% of third graders in the first paragraph had scored proficient. So the remaining students did not pass or did not meet state standard. Second question I have is, what do accommodations look like? So if a student's using assisted technology, were they allowed because it's standardized testing? Were they forced to write like everyone else and their accommodations were just taken away? And then the last thing is, again, because this is the States and I'm not so familiar with it, but what does the curriculum and teaching look like? Right? Is it similar to the test, or did we kind of throw the kids under a bus by throwing them, something that they're really, really not used to? Now, research shows, I'm just going to read it. Research shows that children who don't learn to read by the end of third grade are likely to remain poor readers for the rest of their lives. This might be intuitive, perhaps, but first question is, where's the research? Like, there's not even a citation here, so I don't know where to reference or where I can fact check. When you look at the bar graph here, it includes the percentage of students that are proficient in reading starting in 1992, going up all the way until 2017. But like, if you're looking at the numbers, we started at less than 30%, and by 2017, we're over 30%. I don't really know if this is a huge increase, right? I'm not a person in terms of stats. Let's zoom in a tiny little bit. But we do see some increase, all these years later. Now, granted, you could make the argument that it's not, at 60% or close to 100%, but I mean, at least it's not going down, right? Is it really that bad? But I digress. Now, we're going down a little bit. One of the excuses educators have, by the way, notice the word excuse. One of the excuses educators have long offered to explain America's poor reading performance is poverty. In fact, by some estimates, 1/3 of America's struggling readers are from college-educated families. So again, whose estimates? Where is the data here? I'm not going to say that poverty doesn't affect schooling in general, not just reading. We can't say that poverty alone, obviously, is a contributing factor. But if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if a person's not sleeping, eating, or they don't have, stability in their accommodation or family, obviously that's going to affect everything else. Not simply saying that it's just one thing, but still. So here then we're talking about Jack Silva, who is the Chief Academic Officer for Public Schools in this location that starts with a B, but I don't want to butcher, so I won't pronounce. It's interesting. Apparently this person is the Chief Academic Officer, but in the article they admit to not knowing anything about how children learn to read or how they should be taught. So what does he do? He does a simple Google search, and apparently now he's an expert, and he discovers that all kids can learn how to read if they're taught the air quotes right way. Now, anecdotal, one person, but okay, we keep moving on. Now, it goes on to say that most teachers nationwide are not being taught reading science in their teacher preparation programs because many deans and faculty in colleges of education either don't know the science or dismiss it. At the very least, the latter is an assumption. Again, unless they went around and asked all the deans and the faculties of colleges in the States, or at least in this one state. They talk about Kim Harper later in the article here. And she is the current district supervisor of literacy. She's quoted saying that at some point, because she was a teacher previously, that's just the way it is. You know, we're always going to have X% of kids who it's just going to be a struggle for. The article talks about how some teachers, you know, air quotes, blame that it's low socioeconomic status. So they come from low income. Maybe they don't have both parents at home. Maybe race or religion plays a factor. And I think it is very dangerous to attribute lack of success directly to those. Obviously, like I mentioned earlier, it does play a contributing factor to how the student maybe views schooling or, you know, how they just behave in life. But again, very dangerous just to attribute it just to that. Okay, so here Harper goes to some professional development at one of the lower performing elementary schools. And, you know, they give an example of how a word like horse is being read as house, and that would be considered wrong. But looking at the picture, you know, a student could say pony instead of horse, and that would be considered right because they were using the contextual cue, in this case, the picture. Now, I personally, again, sliding in my personal opinion in here, I found this to be a little problematic because the article doesn't go into depth. Right? So some questions I had were, in the case of the student saying pony instead of horse, are teachers not going back to help the student sound it out? Like, oh, what letter does pony start with? Oh, it's a P. Okay, do you see a P in this word? And then you point to the word horse. And then the second thing is the article doesn't specifically say whether teachers are only, this is capital letters, only focusing on the pictures. Are they teaching students in the States to only look at the pictures and they're not teaching phonics? So again, that is where you need the critical thinking, because if that is the case, then for sure, I'm going to be pointing little fingers at the teachers and being like, that's not good. But if they're using it as a strategy, I don't know if it's as serious or detrimental as the article is playing out to be. Then the article gets into a bunch of commentary about what's balanced literacy, and apparently the teachers can't really explain and the principal can't really explain, and then the person that is from the, you know, American version of ministry, they don't really know, and they're trying to explain it into a colleague, but basically it got a little confusing because it was just anecdotals left, right, and center. Which, again, it's an article, so it's fine to have anecdotals. Again, so long as we're being critical and that this is just, you know, a couple people in the entire country that we're talking about. But what I found a little concerning is when we get to this balanced literacy section, it mentioned and it quotes a man from the 1800s about his take on phonics, or phonemes, technically. So yeah, I'm just laughing because I don't think that needs more of a comment. It is 2022 right now. But anyways, apparently this man is still relevant. And apparently he says that kids need to focus on whole words instead of singular sounds, lest they be pulled away from the meaning of the whole thing. So I'm not sure that was really a fair comparison because people are not necessarily saying that right now. But again, what happens when we sometimes take things out of context. Okay, so now we're getting to my favorite part of the article, if you can call it that. This title, When We Know Better, We Do Better. I personally really like that because this was where I found that they're not really finger pointing. And they do mention, like, for example, in Ontario, that teachers aren't really learning about phonics in their teacher training program. So it's like, it's understandable. Yeah, you know, as the public, we understand why teachers are not doing this. And then here they talked about how some of the teachers basically mix in whole group phonics lessons with small group activities. Long story short, it sounds like they're doing centers, but the only thing is that the lessons were really scripted. So I don't know if they were scripting the language, if they were scripting, you know, first you do this, then you do that, or they're just saying, cover this topic in whichever way you want. Again, it's an article, so I can understand why they don't have that detailed, but still. Last thing I'm going to mention from this article is they go on towards the end to basically compare 2015 and 2018 and using the program for phonics and how the students scored in 2015 prior to the program and then how they scored in 2018. And you see these huge jumps from like essentially 50% or less to, what's the lowest one here? Maybe like 69. So essentially 70% and above. Okay, there's 160% I see here. But this, I'm going to get a little sciencey, a little technical, but we don't know if this data has been disaggregated. So we don't know if it's been broken down into smaller chunks, accounting for other variables. So for example, they mentioned in this article that the kindergarten program, back at least in 2015, was a half day. But when the program, this phonics program, got implemented and later in 2018, it was a full day kindergarten. So was it actually the program making a significant difference, or was it just because students were spending the whole day in school, right? So we have to be really careful with interpreting data before it's been disaggregated, right? Before it's accounted for these other variables. However, having said that, if we're just looking at the raw numbers, it does look like this phonics program at least helped for a phonics-based standardized test. Welcome back. So, in short, basically this article is saying we need phonics. Now, the only thing I found kind of curious is that they don't mention the other two systems. So we're not talking about phonological awareness. We're not talking about sounds. We're not talking about word patterns. They're just like phonics, phonics, phonics. I mean, I understand it's an article, so they have to keep it somewhat concise, although that was a very long article anyways. Again, took a lot of time to go through, but I'll give them that win over there. Okay, so I want to mention a quote. I'm going to read it directly because I thought it was a little bit interesting and it definitely applies to stuff outside of education. Professor says, I am philosophically opposed to, I should do it in a professor voice. I am philosophically opposed to jumping on the bandwagon of the next great thing that's going to teach every child how to learn how to read, said Stacey Reeves, an associate professor of literacy. Phonics for me is not that answer. Now, I think it's really important because even outside of education, there are lots of policies and ways of being that feel like it's a bandwagon. We're going to do this. And then next year, like 6 months later, we're going to do this. Oh, actually, we're going to go back to that first thing. So I think it's really important, Ministry of Education, whoever is in charge, to be able to differentiate how this is not bandwagon jumping. And I've mentioned this is not really a new idea per se to go back or to focus on phonics, but we need to make people believe that there's more substance, right? We're not just changing tones because someone else is in charge. That's the first point. Now, the second point is I think it's really important to not take things out of context. So this article was kind of critiquing that idea of like teachers know best. Now, if, for example, I'm to compare, I don't know, like a car mechanic and a teacher, and I'm not pooping on car mechanics, but, presumably a teacher is better suited to be able to teach in the classroom compared to a car mechanic, assuming the mechanic has no experience in education, right? In the same way that if my car needs to be fixed, I'm going to go to a car mechanic. I'm not going to go to a teacher. And so I think we have to be really careful with this idea of like, oh, knows best, right? And we also have to be careful, personal opinion being inserted into the video right now, especially personal opinion. We also have to be careful with standardization. So I want you to think, I don't myself have kids, but imagine there was, how to be a parent. And I'm not talking about, parenting books that you can voluntarily go look at. I'm talking about there is a guide that says, this is how you are a good parent. Day number 1, your child is born, you must do XYZ. Day number 2, you must do XYZ. And if you don't do those things, then you are a bad parent. Can you imagine the type of controversy that would come out of it? And so the article at one point, they were mentioning in the States that these teachers had every single day down to a T was structured. Now, they didn't mention if it was like just content wise, which I understand, like day 1, you're going to teach this, day 2, you're going to teach that. But if it's even structured to how you teach it, then I'm kind of like, again, we have to be careful with context. That's all I'm going to say on that front. So thank you again for sticking around to the end of the video. I've realized that I've been talking about a lot of contextual things. And so what I want to kind of take the direction now is to something a little bit more concrete. And we're actually going to be looking at what reading looks like, at home, if you're a parent, if you're a tutor, homeschooling, or in the classroom, if you're a teacher. So see you next time. Bye.